The blood on Josie Newell's hands told a story no one wanted to hear, least of all the circuit judge who looked at her like she was already guilty before a single word left her mouth. She stood in the makeshift courtroom of El Dorado Canyon, Nevada, her fingers trembling as she tried to wipe the dried crimson from her palms, knowing that every eye in the room had already decided her fate. It was April of 1878, and justice in these parts moved as swift and merciless as a rattlesnake strike. The judge, a portly man named Horace Blackburn with sweat stains spreading under his arms despite the morning cool, shuffled papers on his desk with barely concealed impatience. Behind Josie, the wooden benches creaked under the weight of curious townspeople who had abandoned their morning chores for the spectacle of watching a woman stand trial for murder. The air smelled of dust, sweat, and something darker that Josie couldn't quite name but felt pressing against her chest like a physical weight. "Miss Newell," Judge Blackburn said without looking up, his voice carrying the bored tone of a man who had already made his decision. "You stand accused of the murder of Calvin Hughes, found dead in his home 3 nights past with a kitchen knife in his chest. How do you plead?" Josie's throat constricted. Her voice came out smaller than she intended, barely audible over the shuffling of feet and whispered conversations behind her. "Not guilty, Your Honor. I can explain what happened if you'll just listen." The judge finally raised his eyes to meet hers, and what she saw there made her blood run cold. There was no curiosity, no interest in truth, only the tired resignation of a man going through motions he found tedious. "Miss Newell, I have heard many tales from many accused. The evidence speaks plainly enough. You were found in the deceased's home, covered in his blood, the weapon at your feet. What explanation could possibly change these facts?" "He attacked me," Josie said, her voice growing stronger now, fueled by desperation. "Calvin Hughes came home drunk and angry. I worked for him as a housekeeper, Your Honor. That night he grabbed me, tore my dress. I fought back. The knife was on the table. When he lunged at me again, I just reacted. It was self-defense." A murmur rippled through the crowd, but Judge Blackburn raised a hand to silence it. His expression hadn't changed. "Miss Newell, that is quite a story. However, I find it difficult to believe that a man of Calvin Hughes' standing in this community would behave in such a manner. He was a respected businessman, a member of the town council. You, on the other hand, are a woman of no particular standing, no family to speak of, and no witnesses to corroborate your fantastical claims." "It's not fantastical," Josie said, her voice breaking. "It's the truth. Please, you have to believe me." Judge Blackburn leaned back in his chair, which groaned under his weight. "Miss Newell, I am a man of law and evidence. The evidence shows you killed a man. Your word, I'm afraid, means nothing without proof. Do you have any witnesses?" "Anyone who can testify to Calvin Hughes' character being anything other than upstanding." Josie felt tears burning behind her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. She thought desperately of anyone who might speak for her, but she was alone in this town. She had arrived only 6 months ago, fleeing from a past in California that she never spoke about. She kept to herself, did her work, and bothered no one. Now that isolation was a noose tightening around her neck. "No," she whispered, "I have no witnesses." "Then I see no reason to continue wasting this court's time," Judge Blackburn said, reaching for his gavel. "Miss Josie Newell, I find you guilty of the murder of Calvin Hughes and sentence you to hang by the neck until dead. The execution will be carried out 3 days hence, at dawn on April 15th. The courtroom erupted into noise, some voices raised in agreement, others in shock. Josie's legs buckled, and she would have fallen if the deputy standing beside her hadn't gripped her arm hard enough to bruise. The world tilted and spun, colors bleeding together as her mind struggled to process the judge's words. 3 days. She had 3 days to live. Your Honor. The voice cut through the chaos like a blade through silk, clear and commanding. The courtroom fell silent, every head turning toward the source. Josie, still reeling, followed their gazes to see a tall man rising from one of the back benches. He wore dusty trail clothes, a worn leather vest over a blue shirt, and a hat that shaded his eyes. But as he removed the hat and walked down the center aisle, Josie could see his face clearly. He was perhaps in his late 20s, with a strong jaw covered in several days' worth of stubble, dark hair that fell past his collar, and eyes the color of creek water in summer. Judge Blackburn's face reddened. This court has made its ruling. Sit down, whoever you are. Name's Pierce Brennan, the man said, his voice steady and respectful but with an undercurrent of steel that made it clear he wouldn't be dismissed easily. I'm a ranch hand from the Double Bar outfit up north. I rode in yesterday and heard about this trial. Your Honor, I request permission to testify. The trial is concluded, Judge Blackburn said flatly. Your testimony is not needed nor wanted. Pierce Brennan stopped a few feet from the judge's desk, his hat held in both hands but his posture radiating quiet confidence. With respect, Your Honor, if you sentence this woman to death without hearing what I have to say, you'll be hanging an innocent woman. I reckon that weighs heavier than the inconvenience of listening for a few minutes. The judge's jaw worked as if chewing something tough. The townspeople waited in breathless silence. Josie stared at this stranger who had appeared from nowhere, this cowboy who seemed willing to speak for her when no one else would. She had never seen him before in her life. Why would he risk the judge's ire for her? Very well, Judge Blackburn finally said, his voice tight with irritation. But make it brief. What could you possibly know about this case? Pierce Brennan turned slightly, his eyes meeting Josie's for the first time. Something passed between them in that moment, a flicker of recognition that made no sense because they were strangers. His eyes held a promise she couldn't quite read, but it gave her something she hadn't felt since the night Calvin Hughes died. Hope. I knew Calvin Hughes, Pierce said, turning back to face the judge. I worked for him 2 years ago when I first came to Nevada. He hired me to help build his first store in town, back when he was just getting established. I worked for him for 3 months. And what bearing does ancient history have on these proceedings? Judge Blackburn demanded. He was a cruel man, Your Honor, mean when he drank, which was most nights. I saw him beat a stable boy nearly to death for spooking a horse. I saw him cheat suppliers and laugh about it, and I saw the way he looked at women, especially those who worked for him. There was a young Mexican girl who cleaned his office. One day she stopped coming. When I asked around, folks said she'd run off in the night, but I saw the bruises on her face the day before she disappeared. Hearsay and speculation, Judge Blackburn said, but his voice had lost some of its certainty. Maybe so, Pierce acknowledged, but here's what isn't speculation. The reason I stopped working for Calvin Hughes is because I caught him forcing himself on a woman in the back room of his store. She was crying, fighting him. I pulled him off her. He came at me with a bottle and I defended myself. Broke his jaw. He ran me out of town, threatened to have me arrested if I ever spoke a word about what I'd seen. The courtroom exploded into noise again. Josie felt her heart hammering in her chest. The deputy's grip on her arm loosened slightly as he too became caught up in the unfolding drama. Order. Judge Blackburn shouted, slamming his gavel repeatedly. Order in this court. When the noise subsided, he fixed Pierce with a hard stare. You expect me to believe you just happened to ride into town at the exact moment this trial was taking place? That you somehow heard about it and decided to share this convenient story? Didn't just happen, Your Honor, Pierce said. I rode in yesterday looking for work. Heard folks talking about the trial in the saloon. When I heard the name Calvin Hughes, I knew I had to come. I've spent 2 years trying to forget what I saw that day, trying to tell myself it wasn't my business. But I can't stand by and watch another woman suffer for defending herself against that man. Do you have any proof of these allegations? The judge asked. The woman I pulled him off of was named Rosa Martinez. She was a seamstress living on the east side of town. If she's still here, she can confirm my story. The stable boy's name was Tommy Chen. He had scars across his back from where Hughes beat him with a riding crop. And my jaw got broken in a fight with Calvin Hughes in August of 1876. There'll be folks who remember that. Judge Blackburn's face had gone from red to pale. He shuffled his papers again, but his hands weren't quite steady. Josie watched this transformation with growing amazement. This stranger, this cowboy named Brennan, was making the judge listen. He was making them all listen. Even if what you say is true, the judge said carefully, it doesn't change the facts of this case. Calvin Hughes is dead, killed by Miss Newell's hand. That is murder. That's self-defense, Pierce countered. You said yourself her word means nothing without proof. Well, I'm giving you proof of what kind of man Calvin Hughes was. I'm telling you that everything Miss Newell said about him attacking her fits exactly with the man I knew. A decent man doesn't die with a knife in his chest from his housekeeper. A man who attacks women, a man who's violent and cruel, that man might push someone too far and find out they'll fight back. Judge Blackburn sat in silence for a long moment. The courtroom held its collective breath. Finally, the judge spoke, his voice heavy with reluctance. I will agree to postpone the execution pending further investigation into these claims. Deputy Morris, please escort Miss Newell back to her cell. Mr. Brennan, you will remain in town and make yourself available for further questioning. This court is adjourned. The gavel fell with a sharp crack that echoed through the room. Josie felt the deputy pulling her toward the back door that led to the jail cells, but she twisted around to look at Brennan one more time. He was already being swarmed by curious townspeople, some angry, some intrigued. But he lifted his eyes above their heads and found hers. He nodded once, a small gesture that somehow conveyed volumes. The cell door clanged shut behind Josie with a finality that made her flinch. The jail was a small structure attached to the rear of the building that housed the general store, consisting of 3 cells and a front room where Deputy Morris kept his desk. The deputy was a young man, not much older than Josie's own 22 years, with sandy hair and a perpetually worried expression. He'd been kind to her, relatively speaking, bringing her meals and not manhandling her unnecessarily. Deputy Morris, Josie said as he turned to leave. Wait, please. He paused, looking back at her with curiosity. Yes, miss. That man, Brennan. Did you know him? Had you heard anything about what he said regarding Calvin Hughes? Deputy Morris shifted uncomfortably, glancing toward the door as if checking to make sure they were alone. Can't say I knew him personally, but I remember hearing about a fight between some drifter and Mr. Hughes a couple years back. Folks talked about it for weeks. Mr. Hughes claimed the drifter tried to rob him. The drifter disappeared after that and the talk died down. So it could be true, Josie pressed. What Pierce said about Hughes being violent. Miss Newell, I'm not supposed to discuss the case with you. But his eyes told a different story. They held doubt, the kind that comes from hearing something that resonates with unspoken suspicions. I will say this, though. My mother used to clean house for Mr. Hughes before you. She quit sudden-like, wouldn't say why. When I asked her about it, she just said some men aren't safe to be alone with. Wouldn't elaborate no matter how much I pressed. A chill ran down Josie's spine, but it was accompanied by a spark of something else. Validation. She wasn't crazy. She wasn't a murderer. She was a woman who had defended herself against a predator, and now, finally, people might believe her. "Thank you," she said softly, "for telling me that." Deputy Morris nodded and left, locking the outer door behind him. Josie sank onto the thin mattress that served as her bed and let herself feel, for the first time in 3 days, something other than despair. She thought about Pierce Brennan, about the way he had stood tall in that courtroom and spoken truth when everyone else had been content to let her hang. She wondered what kind of man did that for a stranger. She wondered if she would ever get the chance to thank him properly. The rest of the day crawled by with agonizing slowness. Deputy Morris brought her lunch, a plate of beans and cornbread that she forced herself to eat despite her churning stomach. As evening approached, the light filtering through the small barred window above her cot turned golden, then orange, then purple. She heard the sounds of the town settling into night, horses whinnying, doors closing, the distant tinny sound of a piano from the saloon down the street. It was full dark when she heard the outer door open and the sound of boots on the wooden floor. She sat up, expecting Deputy Morris with her evening meal. Instead, the footsteps stopped outside her cell, and when she looked up, Pierce Brennan was standing there, his hat in his hands and an expression on his face that was hard to read in the lamplight. "Miss Newell," he said quietly, "I hope you don't mind the visit." Deputy Morris said it would be all right if I kept it brief. Josie stood, her legs shaky, and walked to the bars. Up close, Pierce Brennan was even more striking than she'd realized in the courtroom. He had the weathered look of a man who spent his life outdoors, lines around his eyes from squinting into the sun, but there was also a gentleness in those eyes that seemed at odds with his rough exterior. "Mind," she said, her voice catching slightly. "Mr. Brennan, you saved my life today." "I don't know how to even begin thanking you." "Pierce," he said, "just Pierce, and you don't need to thank me, I only told the truth." "You did more than that," Josie insisted. "You made the judge listen. He wasn't going to hear anything I said, my word meant nothing to him. But you made him pause, made him think. Why would you do that for someone you don't even know?" Pierce was quiet for a moment, his fingers working the brim of his hat. "I've spent 2 years regretting that I didn't do more when I had the chance. I pulled Hughes off that woman, got into a fight with him, and then I left town with my tail between my legs because I didn't want trouble. I told myself it wasn't my business, that I'd done what I could. But I always wondered what happened to Rosa Martinez, whether she was all right. Whether Hughes hurt anyone else. When I heard about your trial, heard how it was going, I knew I couldn't run away again." "That's incredibly brave," Josie said softly. "Not brave," Pierce corrected. "Just doing what should have been done a long time ago. Tell me what happened that night, if you're comfortable sharing." Josie took a deep breath, then began to speak. She told him about being hired by Calvin Hughes 6 months ago, desperate for work and a place to stay. She'd been fleeing her own troubles in California, where her father had died, leaving her with nothing but debts. Hughes had seemed like salvation at first, offering good pay and a small room in his house. But as the weeks went on, she began to notice the way he watched her, the way his hands would linger when he passed her something, the way he drank more and more as the evenings wore on. "That night," she continued, her voice trembling now despite her efforts to keep it steady, "he came home later than usual. I could smell the whiskey on him from across the room. I tried to finish my work quickly and get to my room, but he cornered me in the kitchen. He said things, terrible things about what he wanted to do to me. When I tried to leave, he grabbed me, tore my dress. I fought him, screamed at him to let me go, but he was so much stronger." Pierce's jaw clenched, a muscle jumping beneath the stubble. You don't have to continue if it's too difficult. No, Josie said. I need to tell someone. I need someone to know the truth. The knife was on the table where I'd been cutting vegetables for his dinner. When I managed to break free, I grabbed it. I didn't even think, just reacted. He came at me again, furious now, and I held the knife out to warn him away. But he was drunk and angry, and he lunged. I felt the blade go in, felt his weight against me, and then he fell. There was so much blood. She wrapped her arms around herself, feeling cold despite the warmth of the night. Pierce reached through the bars, his hand extended toward her. After a moment's hesitation, she took it. His palm was calloused and warm, his grip gentle but firm. You did what you had to do to survive, Pierce said with absolute conviction. That's not murder. That's a human being fighting for their life, and I'm going to make sure everyone in this town knows it. How? Josie asked. The judge postponed the execution, but that doesn't mean he'll change his mind. And even if he does, this town loved Calvin Hughes. They'll hate me for killing him. Then we'll change their minds, Pierce said simply. I've already started asking around town. Rosa Martinez still lives here. She's married now, has a family. I went to see her this evening. She was scared at first, didn't want to talk about what happened. But when I told her about you, about the trial, she agreed to testify if needed. She said Hughes attacked her just like you described. Said she'd been too ashamed and afraid to speak up before, but she couldn't let another woman hang for defending herself against that monster. Tears spilled down Josie's cheeks before she could stop them. She'll really testify, she will. And I found Tommy Chen too. He's working at the livery stable. He's got scars all across his back from where Hughes beat him. He's willing to show them to the judge if necessary. I spent the day tracking down everyone I could think of who might have a story about Calvin Hughes. There are more than I expected, Josie. A lot more. People were afraid of him, afraid of his money and influence. But they'll speak up now. I'll make sure of it. Josie squeezed his hand, unable to find words adequate to express what she was feeling. This man, this stranger who owed her nothing, was fighting for her with a determination that took her breath away. She looked at his face in the lamplight, at the set of his jaw and the fire in his eyes, and felt something shift inside her chest. It was too soon, too impossible to name, but she felt drawn to him in a way that went beyond gratitude. Why are you really doing this? She asked again, her voice barely above a whisper. And please don't say it's just about making up for the past. There's something else. I can see it in your eyes. Pierce was quiet for so long that Josie thought he might not answer. Then he said, his voice low and rough, because when I walked into that courtroom today and saw you standing there, looking so small and scared but still holding your head high, still fighting even though everyone had given up on you, something in me recognized something in you. I don't know how else to explain it. It was like seeing someone I'd been looking for without knowing I was searching. I couldn't walk away from you even if I wanted to, and I don't want to. The air between them seemed to thicken with unspoken possibility. Josie felt her heart racing, felt heat rising to her cheeks. It was madness to feel this way about someone she'd just met, especially under these circumstances. But the connection was undeniable, as real as the bars between them. I feel it too, she admitted. I don't understand it, but I feel it. Pierce lifted her hand to his lips and pressed a gentle kiss to her knuckles, a gesture so tender it made fresh tears spring to her eyes. Then we have something to fight for beyond just clearing your name. We have a chance at something good, something real. And I'll be damned if I let them take that away from us. Deputy Morris appeared at the far end of the room, clearing his throat apologetically. Sorry, Mr. Brennan, but I need to ask you to leave now. It's getting late, and I could get in trouble for letting you stay too long. Pierce nodded, releasing Josie's hand with obvious reluctance. "I'll be back tomorrow," he promised, "and I'll keep working on building your defense. We're going to beat this, Josie. I give you my word." "I believe you," she said, and realized with some surprise that she meant it. After Pierce left, Josie lay on her cot staring at the ceiling, replaying every moment of their conversation. She touched her fingers to where he had kissed her hand, still feeling the warmth of his lips. For the first time since Calvin Hughes died, she allowed herself to imagine a future beyond these bars. A future that might include a tall cowboy with summer green eyes and a determination to see justice done. The next morning brought activity earlier than Josie had expected. She woke to the sound of voices in the outer room, many voices, all talking at once. Deputy Morris appeared at her cell looking flustered and excited. "Miss Newell," he said, fumbling with his keys. "Judge Blackburn wants to see you in his chambers. He's called an emergency hearing." Josie's stomach dropped. An emergency hearing? What does that mean? "I don't know exactly, but Mr. Brennan is there, and so are about a dozen other folks. Something's happening. Come on, we need to go now." Josie followed Deputy Morris out of the jail and through the early morning streets of El Dorado Canyon. The town was just waking up, shopkeepers opening their doors, the smell of coffee and frying bacon drifting from the boarding house. A few people stopped to stare as she passed, and she kept her eyes down, unwilling to meet their curious or hostile gazes. Judge Blackburn's chambers were in a small office above the general store. Josie climbed the narrow stairs with Deputy Morris behind her, her heart pounding so hard she felt dizzy. When they entered the office, she was stunned by the number of people crowded into the small space. Pierce was there, standing near the window. Rosa Martinez, a pretty woman with dark hair and gentle eyes, sat in a chair holding hands with a man Josie assumed was her husband. A young Chinese man with a scarred face stood near the door. And there were others, at least 10 more people, all watching her with expressions ranging from sympathy to curiosity. Judge Blackburn sat behind his desk looking like he'd aged 10 years overnight. His face was gray, his eyes bloodshot, his usually immaculate suit rumpled. He gestured for Josie to stand before him, and Deputy Morris positioned himself beside her. "Miss Newell," the judge began, his voice heavy with something that might have been shame, "I have spent the night listening to testimony from numerous citizens of this town. Mr. Brennan here has been remarkably persistent in gathering witnesses to speak about the character of Calvin Hughes and the circumstances leading to his death. What I have heard has troubled me deeply." He paused, shuffling through papers on his desk. Josie didn't dare breathe. Pierce caught her eye and gave her a small, encouraging nod. "Mrs. Rosa Martinez has testified that Calvin Hughes assaulted her in a manner consistent with your account of the night he died," the judge continued. "Mr. Tommy Chen has shown me scars on his back from a beating administered by Hughes over a minor infraction. 3 other women have come forward to report that Hughes made unwanted advances toward them, advances that became aggressive when rebuffed. 2 former employees have testified to Hughes' violent temper, particularly when he'd been drinking. And multiple witnesses have confirmed that Mr. Brennan did indeed work for Hughes 2 years ago and left town after a violent altercation." Judge Blackburn removed his spectacles and rubbed his eyes. "Furthermore, the doctor who examined Hughes' body has reviewed his report in light of this new information. He confirms that the angle of the wound is consistent with someone holding a knife defensively, rather than attacking with intent to kill. The bruising on your arms and the torn dress you were wearing the night of the incident, which I regrettably did not properly consider during the initial trial, support your claim of fighting off an attack." Josie felt her knees weaken. Was this really happening? Was the judge actually saying what she thought he was saying? "Miss Newell," Judge Blackburn said, his voice formal but not unkind, "it is the finding of this court that you acted in self-defense against a violent assault by Calvin Hughes. The charge of murder is hereby dismissed. You are free to go." The room erupted in noise. Rosa Martinez was crying. Her husband was shaking Pierce's hand vigorously. Tommy Chen was smiling for what Josie suspected was the first time in a long while. Deputy Morris unclipped the manacles from Josie's wrists, the metal falling away like shed skin. Josie stood frozen, unable to process what had just happened. Free. She was free. She wasn't going to hang. She wasn't going to die. Through the chaos of voices and movement, she saw Pierce making his way toward her, his eyes locked on hers. And then he was there, standing right in front of her, and she didn't think, didn't hesitate. She threw her arms around his neck and buried her face against his shoulder. Pierce's arms came around her, strong and sure, holding her as she finally let herself break down. She sobbed against his chest, her body shaking with the release of 3 days of terror and grief and hopelessness. He didn't try to shush her or tell her everything was all right. He just held her, one hand stroking her hair, letting her cry it out. When she finally pulled back, wiping her eyes, she found the room had mostly cleared out. Judge Blackburn had left, probably eager to escape the situation. A few people remained, including Rosa Martinez, who approached Josie with hesitant steps. "Miss Newell," Rosa said softly, "I am so sorry I did not speak up sooner. I was afraid and ashamed, and I told myself it was better to stay quiet. When Mr. Brennan came to me yesterday and told me what was happening to you, I knew I could not stay silent anymore. I hope you can forgive me." Josie reached out and took Rosa's hands. "There's nothing to forgive. You were scared. I understand that better than anyone. Thank you for being brave enough to testify when it mattered most. You helped save my life." Rosa squeezed her hands, tears shining in her eyes, then turned to leave with her husband. Tommy Chen approached next, ducking his head shyly. "Miss Newell, I am glad you are free," he said in careful English. "Mr. Hughes was a bad man. I am glad he cannot hurt anyone else. I hope you will be happy now." "Thank you, Tommy," Josie said warmly. "I hope you will be happy too. You deserve peace after what you endured." After everyone had left, it was just Josie and Pierce standing in the empty office. Morning sunlight streamed through the window, painting everything in shades of gold. Josie looked at Pierce, really looked at him, and felt that strange pull again, that sense of recognition and rightness that defied logic. "You did it," she said. "You actually did it. You made them listen." "We did it," Pierce corrected. "You survived, you fought. You never gave up, even when it looked hopeless. All I did was make sure people heard the truth." "All you did," Josie repeated with a shaky laugh. "Pierce, you turned this entire town around in less than 24 hours. You found witnesses, got them to testify, convinced the judge to give me another hearing. You saved my life." Pierce stepped closer, reaching up to gently brush a strand of hair from her face. The gesture was intimate, tender, and Josie's breath caught. "I meant what I said last night. Something in me recognized something in you. I don't know if you believe in fate or destiny or anything like that, but I walked into that courtroom yesterday because I was supposed to. Because you needed someone to fight for you, and I needed someone worth fighting for." "I barely know you," Josie whispered, but she didn't pull away. "Then let's change that," Pierce said. "Let's get to know each other, properly. Let me court you the right way, take you to dinner. Show you that there's more to life in this territory than pain and fear. Show you that there are good people here, and that you can have a fresh start." Josie thought about her little room in Calvin Hughes' house, the few possessions she owned, the uncertain future that stretched before her. She thought about the terror of the last 3 days, the horror of taking a life even in self-defense, the weight of judgment and condemnation. And then she looked at Pierce, at his honest eyes and strong hands and the promise of something new and beautiful. "I'd like that," she said. "I'd like that very much." Pierce smiled, a real smile that transformed his whole face, and Josie felt an answering warmth bloom in her chest. He offered her his arm, and she took it, letting him lead her down the stairs and out into the bright morning of her first day of freedom. The next weeks passed in a blur of activity and emotion. Josie discovered that her possessions had been removed from Calvin Hughes' house by a grim-faced Deputy Morris and stored in the jail for safekeeping. Among them was her small savings, enough to rent a room at Mrs. Henderson's boarding house on the respectable end of town. Mrs. Henderson, a widow in her 50s with kind eyes and a no-nonsense manner, welcomed Josie warmly and asked no uncomfortable questions about recent events. Pierce came to call on her every evening after he finished work. He'd found employment at the Double Bar Ranch outside of town, working as a horsebreaker and general ranch hand. The work was hard and the hours long, but he never failed to appear at Mrs. Henderson's door promptly at 7 o'clock, freshly washed and wearing his best shirt. They took walks through town as the desert air cooled with evening, talking about everything and nothing. Pierce told her about his childhood in Missouri, the son of a farmer who died when Pierce was 16, forcing him to make his own way in the world. He drifted west like so many others, chasing opportunity and adventure, working as a cowhand, a miner, a carpenter, whatever paid. He'd been in Nevada for 4 years now, and he loved the wild openness of the territory, the way the mountains rose stark and beautiful against endless sky. Josie, in turn, shared her own story. She'd grown up in San Francisco, the only child of a dock worker who'd always meant well but couldn't stay away from gambling. When he died, she discovered he'd mortgaged their small house to pay gambling debts, leaving her with nothing. Rather than accept charity or the degrading work that was often the only option for women alone, she'd headed east, looking for a place where she could make a fresh start. She'd landed in El Dorado Canyon by chance, stepping off the stagecoach because she'd run out of money to continue further. "I thought I'd found a solution when Calvin Hughes hired me," she said one evening as they sat on the porch of the boarding house, watching the stars emerge in the deepening twilight. "I thought I was lucky. Shows how wrong you can be about things." "You were lucky," Pierce said, taking her hand in his. "Not because Hughes hired you, but because you're strong enough to survive what happened. Not every woman would have fought back. Not every woman would have kept her head through what you went through in that jail cell and courtroom." "I don't feel strong," Josie admitted. "Most days I feel like I'm held together with string and prayers. Some nights I wake up and I'm back in that kitchen, feeling the knife go in, seeing the blood. Other nights I dream about the gallows, about the noose around my neck." Pierce pulled her closer, wrapping his arm around her shoulders. Josie leaned into his warmth, breathing in the scent of him, leather and soap and something uniquely his own. "Those dreams will fade," he promised. "Give it time, and know that you're not alone anymore. I'm here, and I'm not going anywhere." Josie tilted her face up to look at him. In the starlight, his features were soft, shadows playing across the strong lines of his jaw and cheekbones. She'd never felt about anyone the way she felt about Pierce. It wasn't just gratitude, though she was grateful beyond words. It wasn't just attraction, though she couldn't deny the way her pulse jumped when he was near. It was something deeper, something that felt like coming home to a place she'd never been. "Pierce," she said softly, "kiss me." His eyes widened slightly, surprise and desire warring in their depths. "Josie, I don't want to rush you. You've been through so much. I don't want you to feel pressured or obligated." "I don't feel pressured," she said firmly. "I feel alive for the first time in months, maybe years. You make me feel alive. And I want this. I want you." Pierce's hand came up to cup her cheek, his thumb brushing across her cheekbone with infinite tenderness. Then he leaned down and kissed her, soft and sweet and achingly gentle. Josie's eyes fluttered closed as she kissed him back, her hands coming up to rest against his chest. She could feel his heartbeat, strong and steady beneath her palms. The kiss deepened slightly, still tender but with an underlying current of passion that made her toes curl. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing a little harder, Pierce rested his forehead against hers. "I'm falling in love with you, Josie Newell," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "I know it's fast. I know we should probably take things slower. But I've never been one for lying, especially not to myself. I'm falling for you hard and fast, and I needed you to know." Tears pricked Josie's eyes, but they were good tears, joyful tears. "I'm falling for you too," she whispered. "I didn't think I'd ever feel this way about anyone. Didn't think I deserved to feel this way after everything that's happened. But you make me believe in second chances." They sat together on that porch until the stars filled the sky and Mrs. Henderson called through the door that it was getting late and Josie should come inside. Pierce walked home to his room at the ranch bunkhouse, feeling like he was floating 6 inches off the ground. Josie went to bed and, for the first time in weeks, slept through the night without nightmares. As spring turned toward summer, their relationship deepened. Pierce introduced Josie to the other ranch hands at the double bar, a collection of colorful characters who treated her with respect and warmth. Rosa Martinez sought out Josie's friendship, and the two women bonded over shared experience and genuine affection. Josie found work helping at the general store, the owner needing someone to keep accounts and help with customers. The work was honest and the pay fair. And for the first time since leaving San Francisco, Josie felt like she was building a real life. On a scorching afternoon in late June, Pierce borrowed a wagon from the ranch and drove Josie out to a place he'd discovered, a small canyon where a spring fed a pool surrounded by cottonwood trees. The spot was an oasis in the harsh desert landscape, cool and green and private. They spread a blanket under the trees and shared the picnic lunch Josie had packed, cold chicken and bread and fresh peaches from the vendor who came through town weekly. After eating, they lay side by side on the blanket, watching sunlight filter through the leaves above them. "I've been thinking," Pierce said, his voice hesitant in a way that was unlike him. "I've been saving my wages. Not spending much since I don't have expensive tastes. I've got enough put away now to think about making some changes." Josie rolled onto her side to face him, propping her head on her hand. "What kind of changes?" "The ranch I've been working at, the double bar, the owner's getting old, wants to retire. He's been talking about selling off parts of his land to fund his retirement. There's a section with good water and grazing that I've had my eye on. It's small, only about 500 acres, but it would be enough to start something. Build a house, run some cattle, make a real go of it." Josie's heart began to beat faster. She knew what he was saying, could read it in the careful way he was choosing his words, the nervousness in his eyes. "That sounds wonderful, Pierce. You'd make an excellent rancher." "I would need help, though," Pierce continued, sitting up now and taking her hands in his. "Running a ranch is more than one person can handle alone. I'd need a partner, someone smart and strong and brave enough to take on that kind of challenge." "Pierce," Josie breathed. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small box. When he opened it, Josie saw a simple gold band with a small turquoise stone set in the center. It wasn't fancy, but it was beautiful in its simplicity. "Josie Newell," Pierce said, his voice steady now, filled with conviction. I know we've only known each other a few months. I know some folks will say it's too fast, but I've never been more sure of anything in my life. You are the strongest, most remarkable woman I've ever met. You've been through hell and came out the other side with your spirit intact. I love you more than I thought it was possible to love another person. Will you marry me? Will you build a life with me out here in this wild country? Josie's vision blurred with tears, but she was smiling so wide her face hurt. Yes, she said, her voice breaking with emotion. Yes, Pierce, I'll marry you. I love you. I want to build a life with you more than anything. Pierce slipped the ring onto her finger, then pulled her into his arms and kissed her with a passion that left them both breathless. They held each other under the cottonwood trees as the afternoon sun climbed toward evening, making plans and promises and dreaming of their future together. They were married 3 weeks later in a simple ceremony at the small church in El Dorado Canyon. Rosa Martinez stood as Josie's witness, and Pierce's friend Jake from the ranch stood for him. Mrs. Henderson cried through the whole ceremony, dabbing at her eyes with a lace handkerchief. Deputy Morris attended, giving Josie a shy smile that said he was genuinely happy for her. Even Judge Blackburn made an appearance, looking uncomfortable but staying for the whole service. Josie wore a simple dress of blue calico that Rosa had helped her make, and Pierce wore his best suit, his hair freshly cut and his boots polished to a shine. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Pierce kissed her so sweetly that more than one person in the small congregation wiped away tears. They held a modest reception in the church hall, with cake and lemonade and a fiddle player providing music. Pierce led Josie in a dance, holding her close and whispering in her ear how beautiful she looked, how lucky he was, how much he loved her. Josie felt like her heart might burst from happiness. That night, they stayed in a room at the boarding house that Mrs. Henderson had decorated with wildflowers and her finest linens. Pierce carried Josie over the threshold, making her laugh with the old-fashioned gesture. They made love slowly, tenderly, discovering each other with gentle hands and whispered words of affection. Afterward, they lay tangled together in the darkness, listening to the sounds of the town settling into sleep. "Happy?" Pierce asked, his fingers tracing lazy patterns on her bare shoulder. "Happier than I ever thought possible," Josie replied, pressing a kiss to his chest. "A few months ago, I was waiting to hang for a crime I committed in self-defense. Now I'm married to the most wonderful man I've ever known. It feels like a dream." "It's real," Pierce assured her. "This is real and it's ours, and nothing is going to take it away from us." The months that followed were filled with hard work, but also deep satisfaction. Pierce completed the purchase of the land from the double-bar owner, and together, he and Josie began the enormous task of building their ranch. Pierce built a small cabin first, just 4 rooms but solid and weatherproof. Josie made it a home, sewing curtains for the windows and planting a garden outside the door. They bought a small herd of cattle, just 30 head to start, and Pierce worked from dawn to dusk getting fences up and a barn built. Josie helped where she could, learning to ride a horse properly and even trying her hand at roping, though she never quite got the hang of it. They hired a ranch hand named Miguel, a quiet man in his 40s who knew cattle and worked hard without complaint. During the winter of 1878, as snow dusted the peaks of the surrounding mountains and cold winds whistled around their cabin, Josie discovered she was pregnant. She told Pierce on Christmas morning, watching his face transform from surprise to wonder to pure joy in the space of a heartbeat. "A baby," he said, his hand moving to rest gently on her still flat stomach. "Josie, we're going to have a baby. Are you happy?" she asked, suddenly nervous. They'd never discussed children, and she worried he might think it was too soon, that they had too much work to do getting the ranch established. "Happy," Pierce laughed, pulling her into a tight embrace. "I'm over the moon. I'm terrified and thrilled and so grateful I could cry. This is everything I never knew I wanted." Their son was born in late summer of 1879, delivered by Mrs. Henderson and Rosa Martinez, while Pierce paced the cabin floor wearing a path in the boards. The baby came into the world with a lusty cry, healthy and strong. When they placed him in Pierce's arms, Josie watched her husband's face soften with a love so profound it brought tears to her eyes. "What should we name him?" Pierce asked, unable to take his eyes off the tiny face. "Thomas," Josie said. "After your father, Thomas Brennan." Pierce looked up at her with so much love and gratitude that she felt it like a physical warmth spreading through her chest. "Thomas Brennan," he repeated. "It's perfect." Life settled into a rhythm of early mornings and long days, of hard work and simple pleasures. Thomas grew into a cheerful toddler with his father's green eyes and his mother's dark hair. The ranch prospered modestly but steadily. They added more cattle, bought 2 good horses, and Pierce began breaking horses for other ranchers in the area, building a reputation as someone with a gift for working with difficult animals. Josie became known in town for her kindness and her sharp mind. She helped Rosa Martinez teach English to Mexican women who wanted to learn, and she kept meticulous records for several of the town's businesses, her neat handwriting and head for figures making her valuable. The whispers about her past, about Calvin Hughes and the trial, faded as people saw her for who she truly was, a good woman who'd survived something terrible and built a beautiful life from the ashes. On their 2nd anniversary, Pierce surprised Josie with a gift, a beautiful mare with a gentle temperament and intelligent eyes. "Her name is Lady," Pierce said, leading the horse forward. "She's yours. I know you've been sharing the ranch horses with me and Miguel, but I thought you should have one of your own. Plus, when Thomas gets a little bigger, she'll be perfect for teaching him to ride." Josie threw her arms around Pierce's neck, kissing him soundly. "She's perfect. You're perfect." "I love you so much." "I love you too," Pierce said. "Every single day I wake up grateful that I walked into that courtroom and saw you standing there. You changed my life, Josie. You made me believe in something bigger than just getting by. You made me believe in home." Years passed, measured in seasons and growth. Thomas grew into a bright, energetic boy who followed his father everywhere, learning to ride almost before he could walk properly. In 1882, Josie gave birth to a daughter they named Sarah, a beautiful baby with Pierce's smile and a temperament as sunny as a summer day. The cabin expanded to accommodate their growing family, Pierce adding rooms as they could afford them. The ranch continued to prosper. Pierce's reputation as a horseman grew, and they were able to hire 2 more hands, expanding their operation. Josie started a small business selling eggs and vegetables to the boarding house and the restaurant in town, adding to their income. They weren't wealthy, but they were comfortable, and more importantly, they were happy. One evening in the spring of 1885, after the children were asleep and the ranch was quiet, Pierce and Josie sat on the porch of their home watching the sun set over the mountains. Pierce had his arm around Josie's shoulders and she was leaning into him, her head resting against his chest. "You ever think about that day?" Pierce asked quietly. "The day of the trial." Josie was silent for a moment, considering. "Sometimes," she admitted. "Not as much as I used to. When I do think about it, it feels like it happened to someone else, a different Josie in a different life. But then I remember that if it hadn't happened exactly the way it did, we might never have met. As terrible as it was, as scared as I was, it brought me to you. So I can't regret it, not completely. I wish you'd never had to go through it," Pierce said fiercely. "I wish I could have stopped Hughes years earlier, before he ever hurt you or Rosa or anyone else. You did stop him, Josie said, lifting her head to look at her husband. Maybe not before he hurt people, but you stopped him from destroying me. You made people listen when no one else would. You gave me my life back, Pierce. You gave me this life, this beautiful, impossible life that I treasure every single day. Pierce kissed the top of her head. We gave each other this life. You fought to survive, and I fought to make people see the truth. Together we built something real and good out of a terrible situation. That's what I'm most proud of. Not the ranch, not the horses or the cattle, but us, our family, the life we've made together. In 1888, their family grew once more with the birth of another son they named Daniel. Thomas, now 9 years old, was thrilled to have a baby brother and took his role as big brother seriously. Sarah, at 6, was equally enchanted, helping her mother care for the baby whenever she was allowed. The ranch had grown to over 1,000 acres, with a herd of 200 cattle and a thriving horse breeding operation. Pierce had built a reputation as one of the best horsemen in Nevada, and people came from all over the territory to buy horses he'd trained. Josie managed the business side of things, her sharp mind and organized record ensuring they stayed profitable even in difficult years. In town, Josie had become a respected member of the community. She served on the church committee and helped organize the annual Harvest Festival. Rosa Martinez remained her closest friend, their children growing up together. Even Judge Blackburn, now retired, would tip his hat to her when they passed on the street, a gesture of respect that spoke to how far she'd come. One afternoon in late 1890, Josie was in town picking up supplies when she overheard 2 women talking in the general store. They didn't realize she was in the next aisle, separated only by a tall shelf of goods. "That's Josie Brennan," one woman said. "Can you believe she's the same woman who killed Calvin Hughes all those years ago?" Josie froze, her hand tightening on the basket she carried. "I'd hardly call it killing," the other woman replied firmly. "She defended herself against a man who attacked her. My husband says Pierce Brennan is one of the finest men he's ever known, and he wouldn't have married her if she were anything but a good woman. Besides, everyone knows now what Calvin Hughes really was. Good riddance, I say." "I suppose you're right," the first woman conceded. "And she certainly made a success of herself. That ranch of theirs is one of the best run in the county, and her children are so well behaved and polite." Josie quietly moved to a different aisle, not wanting to hear more. But as she continued her shopping, she felt a warmth spreading through her chest. She'd worried for years about what people thought of her, about whether she'd ever be able to escape the shadow of that terrible night and the trial that followed. To hear casual acceptance, even defense of her actions, felt like a final piece of healing clicking into place. That evening, she told Pierce about the conversation she'd overheard. They were sitting in the parlor of their expanded house, Pierce reading the newspaper while Josie mended one of Thomas's shirts. "I'm glad people see the truth," Pierce said, setting down his paper. "But more importantly, you see it. Do you know deep down that what happened wasn't your fault? That you deserve all the happiness we've found?" Josie set aside her mending and moved to sit beside her husband on the settee. "I do," she said. "It took a long time, but I finally believe it. I'm not that scared girl in the jail cell anymore. I'm a woman who survived, who built a life worth living, and I have you to thank for showing me that was possible." Pierce pulled her close, kissing her with the passion and tenderness that had never dimmed in their years together. "You did the hard part," he murmured against her lips. "You survived, you fought, you never gave up. I just made sure people knew the truth." The years continued to pass, bringing changes and challenges, but also deep contentment. Thomas grew into a young man who loved the ranch as much as his father did, working alongside Pierce and learning everything he could about horses and cattle. Sarah developed a talent for drawing and painting, filling the house with beautiful sketches of the landscape and animals. Daniel was still young but showed signs of his father's quiet strength and his mother's quick mind. In 1895, on their 17th wedding anniversary, Pierce and Josie took a trip alone for the first time in years. Thomas was 20 and responsible enough to run the ranch for a few days, and they left the younger children in the care of Rosa and her husband. They rode to the hidden canyon where Pierce had proposed, the place that held such special meaning for them. The spring was still there, the pool still clear and cool beneath the cottonwood trees, but they were different people now, shaped by years of love and work and family. Pierce's hair had threads of gray at the temples, and lines around his eyes spoke of years spent squinting into the sun. Josie's hands were rougher than they'd been in her youth, marked by work and life, but her eyes still held that spark that had first caught Pierce's attention in the courtroom so many years ago. They spread a blanket under the trees just as they had all those years before, but this time they moved with the comfortable ease of long familiarity. They made love under the afternoon sun, their bodies fitting together perfectly, every touch a conversation they'd been having for 17 years. Afterward, lying in each other's arms, Pierce said, "Do you remember what I asked you here?" "How could I forget?" Josie replied, smiling. "You asked me to build a life with you in this wild country." "Have I made you happy?" Pierce asked, his voice serious. "Has it been a good life?" Josie propped herself up on one elbow to look at him properly. She saw in his face the man who had stood up in a courtroom and spoken truth when no one else would, the man who had fought for her when she'd had no one else, the man who had loved her through good times and difficult ones, never wavering. "Pierce Brennan," she said firmly, "you have made me happier than I ever dreamed possible. When I stood in that courtroom waiting to hear my death sentence, I thought my life was over. I thought I'd never know love or family or a home I could call my own. You didn't just save my life that day. You gave me a life worth living. You gave me everything I'd ever wanted and things I didn't even know to want. So yes, my darling, it's been a very good life." Pierce pulled her down for a deep kiss. "Here's to many more years," he said when they broke apart. "To watching our children grow and maybe someday meeting grandchildren. To building this life we've made together until we're old and gray." "We're already getting gray," Josie teased, running her fingers through his salt and pepper hair. "Then to being even more gray," Pierce laughed. "Together." By 1900, the new century had arrived, bringing changes to Nevada and the whole country. El Dorado Canyon had grown, with a proper courthouse now and a railroad spur connecting it to larger towns. The Brennan Ranch had become one of the most successful in the county, known for quality horses and well-managed cattle. Pierce and Josie had become pillars of the community, respected and admired. Thomas had married a sweet girl named Emily from a neighboring ranch, and they were expecting their first child. Sarah had surprised everyone by deciding to attend teachers' college in Carson City, her artistic talents complemented by a love of learning and teaching. Daniel, now 12, showed every sign of following in his father's footsteps with horses. On a warm evening in June of 1900, the entire Brennan family gathered at the ranch for Sunday dinner, a tradition they'd maintained for years. Thomas and Emily were there, Emily's pregnancy making her glow. Sarah was home from college for the summer. Daniel was showing off a new foal to anyone who would look. Rosa and her family came, their children now grown with families of their own. Even Deputy Morris, now the county sheriff, stopped by with his wife. As Josie looked around the table at the faces of people she loved, she felt overwhelmed with gratitude. This life, this beautiful, full life, had seemed impossible during those dark days in the jail cell. She'd been certain she would die, that her story would end in violence and fear. Instead, she'd been given a second chance, and she'd built something magnificent with it. After dinner, as the sun set and the evening cooled, Pierce found Josie standing at the fence looking out over their land. He came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist and resting his chin on her shoulder. "What are you thinking about?" he asked. "Everything," Josie said. "Our life, how we got here, how lucky we've been." "Not luck," Pierce said. "Hard work and love and determination. We made this life, Josie. We earned it." Josie turned in his arms to face him. 22 years of marriage hadn't dimmed the love she felt for this man. If anything, it had deepened, grown richer and more complex with every year that passed. "You know what I think about sometimes," she said. "I think about the circuit judge and how he said my word meant nothing. How he was ready to hang me without even listening to my story. And then I think about you, standing up in that courtroom and making everyone listen, making them see the truth. You gave me back my voice, Pierce. You made my word mean something again." Pierce cupped her face in his hands, his eyes intense with emotion. "Your word always meant something, Josie. You've always mattered. I just made sure other people realized it." "You changed everything," Josie said softly. "Not just for me, but for other women too. Rosa told me that after my trial, after people learned the truth about Calvin Hughes, 2 other women came forward with stories about men who'd hurt them. They found the courage to speak up because they saw that someone would listen. That's your legacy, Pierce. You didn't just save one woman. You showed an entire town that justice matters, that truth matters, that everyone's word should mean something." Pierce kissed her forehead, then her cheeks, then her lips. "Our legacy," he corrected. "We did this together. Your courage, your strength, your refusal to give up even when everything seemed hopeless, that inspired people. I'm proud to have stood beside you, then and every day since." They stood together as darkness fell, watching stars emerge one by one in the vast Nevada sky. From the house came the sounds of laughter and conversation, family and friends enjoying each other's company. Thomas's voice carried on the night air, telling some story that made everyone laugh. Sarah was playing the piano, the notes drifting out through the open windows. Daniel was probably still out in the barn with that foal. This was home. This was family. This was a life built on truth and justice and love. And it had all started with a cowboy who stood up in a courtroom and made people listen, who saw a woman in desperate need and decided she was worth fighting for. In November of 1900, Thomas and Emily welcomed their first child, a son they named Pierce after his grandfather. When Pierce Brennan held his grandson for the first time, Josie watched the expression on her husband's face and felt tears of joy streaming down her cheeks. This tiny baby represented the future, the continuation of everything they'd built together. "He's perfect," Pierce whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "Absolutely perfect. Just like his grandfather," Josie said, moving to stand beside her husband and looking down at their grandson's tiny face. As the years continued to pass, Pierce and Josie grew older but never apart. They weathered droughts and harsh winters, market downturns and personal losses. Pierce's mother died in 1903, and though she'd been back in Missouri and he hadn't seen her in years, he grieved the loss of that connection to his past. Josie held him through those difficult days, just as he'd held her through her own trials. In 1905, Rosa Martinez passed away suddenly from a fever, and Josie mourned the loss of her dearest friend. Pierce was there for her, understanding her grief, giving her space to feel it while never letting her feel alone. They attended the funeral together, Pierce's arm strong around Josie's shoulders as she wept. But there were joys, too. Sarah married a teacher she'd met at college, a kind man who encouraged her artistic pursuits. Daniel grew into a fine horseman who made his father proud every day. Thomas and Emily had 3 more children, filling the ranch with the sound of grandchildren's laughter. In 1910, on their 32nd wedding anniversary, Pierce surprised Josie with a gift. It was a painting, commissioned from Sarah, showing the courtroom from that fateful day in 1878. But it wasn't a scene of despair. Instead, Sarah had painted the moment Pierce stood up to testify, his face determined, his posture strong. And she'd painted Josie not as a frightened accused woman, but as someone finding hope, her face turned toward Pierce with dawning belief that maybe, just maybe, everything would be all right. "I wanted you to see that day the way I saw it," Pierce said as Josie stared at the painting with tears streaming down her face. "Not as a nightmare, but as the beginning of everything good in our lives. That was the day I found you, Josie. The day I found my purpose and my future. I wouldn't change it for anything." Josie couldn't speak past the lump in her throat, so she just held her husband tight, this man who had given her everything, who had seen her at her lowest and loved her anyway, who had spent more than 3 decades showing her every single day that she was valued, cherished, and believed. By 1915, Pierce and Josie were in their late 50s, their children grown and independent, their grandchildren numerous and beloved. They'd handed over the daily running of the ranch to Thomas and Daniel, who worked together seamlessly to keep the operation thriving. Pierce still worked with horses when the mood struck him, but mostly he and Josie spent their days in quieter pursuits, tending the garden, raiding, taking long rides through the land they loved. One summer evening, they rode out to the hidden canyon one more time. They were older now, moving more slowly, but the canyon was unchanged, the spring still flowing clear and cool, the cottonwood trees still providing shade. They sat on a blanket under those trees, holding hands and watching the light change as the sun moved toward the horizon. Pierce's hair was fully gray now, his face deeply lined from years in the sun. Josie's hands were gnarled with arthritis, her own hair more silver than dark. But when they looked at each other, they still saw the people they'd fallen in love with all those years ago. "Do you remember the first time we came here?" Pierce asked. "When I asked you to marry me?" "Every detail," Josie said. "I remember thinking it was too good to be true, that I didn't deserve this kind of happiness after everything that had happened." "And now?" Pierce asked. "Now I know that everyone deserves happiness," Josie said firmly. "That what happened to me wasn't my fault, and that surviving it made me stronger, not lesser. Now I know that love is real and lasting, that building a life with someone you trust is the greatest adventure there is. Now I know that I'm lucky beyond measure to have spent my life with you." Pierce lifted her hand to his lips and kissed it, just as he had through the bars of her jail cell so many years ago. "I'm the lucky one," he said. "You made me better than I was. You gave my life meaning and purpose. Every day with you has been a gift." They sat together as the sun set, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink and purple. They didn't speak much, didn't need to. After 37 years of marriage, they could communicate in silence, in touches and looks and the simple comfort of being together. As darkness fell and stars began to emerge, Pierce helped Josie to her feet. They packed up their blanket and walked slowly back to where they'd tied their horses. The ride back to the ranch was unhurried, both of them savoring the cool night air and the sound of crickets in the brush. When they reached home, lights were blazing from the windows. Thomas and his family were there, having come for dinner. Daniel and his wife were there too, along with several of the grandchildren. The house was full of noise and life and love. Josie stood on the porch for a moment before going inside, looking at Pierce beside her and the bright windows behind them. She thought about that terrified girl standing in a courtroom waiting to be condemned, thought about the judge who had dismissed her words without a second thought, and about the cowboy who had stood up and made everyone listen. That cowboy had become her husband, her partner, her best friend. Together they'd built a life that exceeded anything she could have imagined in her darkest moments. They'd raised children who were kind and strong. They'd built a legacy of honesty and hard work. They'd shown an entire community that justice mattered, that truth mattered, that every voice deserved to be heard. "Ready to go in?" Pierce asked, offering her his arm. Josie took it, smiling up at him. "With you, always." They walked into their home together, into the warmth and light and laughter of their family, into the life they'd built from ashes and hope and unwavering love. Behind them, the Nevada night stretched vast and beautiful, full of stars and possibility, just as it had been on that April day in 1878 when a circuit judge said her word meant nothing and a cowboy testified for her and made them listen. And in the decades that followed, in the stories their children told their grandchildren, in the way people in El Dorado Canyon spoke about justice and fairness, and the importance of standing up for truth, Pierce and Josie's legacy lived on. They'd proven that one person willing to speak truth could change everything, that love could grow from the darkest circumstances, and that redemption was always possible for those brave enough to reach for it. They lived long lives, Pierce and Josie, growing old together in the house they'd built on the land they loved. They watched their grandchildren grow and their great-grandchildren arrive. They celebrated 50 years of marriage surrounded by family and friends, toasted by a community that had come to love and respect them both. And when Pierce passed peacefully in his sleep in 1925 at the age of 71, with Josie holding his hand, his last words were, "Thank you for saying yes. Thank you for building this beautiful life with me." Josie lived 2 more years after Pierce died, and though she missed him every moment of every day, she never regretted their life together. She spent those final years telling stories to her great-grandchildren about the cowboy who had stood up in a courtroom and changed her life, about the importance of truth and justice, and believing in second chances. When Josie Brennan passed away quietly in her sleep in 1927 at the age of 69, the church in El Dorado Canyon was packed with people who came to pay their respects. They spoke of her kindness, her strength, her unwavering integrity. They spoke of the life she'd built and the legacy she'd left. But most of all, they spoke of the love between Pierce and Josie Brennan, a love that had started in the most unlikely circumstances and had grown into something legendary. They were buried side by side on a hill overlooking their ranch, under a sky as vast and beautiful as the love they'd shared. Their headstones were simple, bearing their names and the dates of their births and deaths. But beneath those dates, their children had added one line that captured everything that had mattered to them. They made each other listen and built a life on truth and love. And in the years that followed, when people in El Dorado Canyon told the story of the circuit judge who said her word meant nothing and the cowboy who testified for her and made them listen, it was always told as a love story. Because that's what it was at its heart. A story of 2 people who found each other in the darkest circumstances, who fought for justice and truth, and who built a life together that proved love could conquer even the deepest despair. The ranch continued to thrive under the management of their descendants, who carried forward the values Pierce and Josie had instilled. The story of that day in the courtroom was passed down through generations, a reminder of the importance of standing up for what's right, of listening to those who have been silenced, and of the transformative power of love. In the town of El Dorado Canyon, in the state of Nevada, under the vast desert sky where stars shine bright and clear, the legacy of Pierce and Josie Brennan lived on. Not just in the land they'd worked and the family they'd raised, but in the example they'd set, the courage they'd shown, and the love they'd shared. They had proven that from the darkest moment can come the brightest future, that one voice speaking truth can change the world, and that love, real and true and lasting love, can overcome anything. Their story became part of the fabric of the West, a tale told around campfires and dinner tables, in courtrooms and churches, anywhere people gathered to speak of justice and courage and love. And always, when the story was told, it ended the same way, with a cowboy and a woman standing together under the Nevada sky, having built a life worth living from the courage to speak truth and the strength to believe in second chances.